They say great artists dedicate themselves completely to their vision. But what happens when that vision demands something crazy, monstrous? In Seoul, one photographer's pursuit of the perfect shot would cross a line so horrifying, even the police struggled to believe what they were seeing. Because this was not just art. This was death. Captured, framed, and developed. And the woman in his most haunting photograph never agreed to be in it. This is the unsettling case of the man people would later call the Death Director. CTYC. So let me take you to January 11th, 1983, in Gumcheon District, South Korea. It's one of those cold, biting winters where everything feels frozen in place. A few kids decided to climb halfway to Mount Hoamsan to play. Because that's what kids do, even in weather that makes adults want to stay inside. They were playing the original Squid Game, not the Netflix one. This is the real childhood game. From what I gathered, it's like a mix between Tag and Red Rover. Lots of running, pushing, shouting, falling over, classic kids chaos. And as they're stomping around in this huge blanket of dried, crunchy leaves, one of the kids spots something sticking out. It's white, it's hard, and it looks like a doll, or maybe a mannequin. He calls his friends over. They start pulling at it together because it won't come out easily. The leaves are frozen, the object is heavy, everything's stuck. And then slowly they uncover legs, a torso, a head. That's when they realize exactly what they are touching. It's not a mannequin. It's a woman, a naked woman. The kids immediately freak out, which honestly, who wouldn't? And they run straight home to find their families, who call the police. When police reach the site, they notice something interesting. Because the temperatures were so cold, the body had not decomposed much. In a strange way, winter had preserved her. But that did not actually make things easier. The mountain was large, remote, and quiet. Her face was unrecognizable. There were no signs of a struggle, no obvious wounds. So the officers wondered, was this exposure? Some kind of an accident? Or was she murdered? But one detail would not let that theory rest. She had been left completely naked and in an awkward position, as if it was staged. That alone was enough to raise every red flag possible. Investigators sent the body for an autopsy and took her fingerprints for identification. And that's when they learned she'd been lying there for over a month, frozen, covered in leaves, untouched. Her fingerprints finally gave her a name. Kim Kyung-hee. She was just 24 years old. She was originally from Gyeonggi province. She worked at a factory in Daegu, which was a major center for South Korea's textile and manufacturing industry. The country was going through rapid industrialization. At the factory, she met her husband. She married young, around 20 years old, had 2 sons, but her husband drank heavily, and when he got drunk, he got violent. So she left. She moved to Seoul, hoping for a fresh start. In 1982, she began working at a barbershop in Songpa district. Not the normal barbershop. It's different, this one. This one has 2 poles outside the shop. Now, people familiar with Korea in the 80s and 90s know what a barbershop with 2 poles means. It's a code for shop offering beard shaves, massages, and other services, if you know what I'm saying. If you have seen The Glory, you will remember Moon Dong-eun's mother working in one of those places. I'm going to show you right here. That's the kind of shop where Kim Kyung-hee worked. She was barely scraping by. And from there, her trail disappears. Until those children found her on a frozen mountainside. Police started the way they always do. Try to map out her last movements, her last conversations, her last choices. In barbershops like the one Kim worked at, people came and went all the time. Employees quitting without notice was not unusual at all. So when she stopped showing up around mid-December of 1982, nobody sounded the alarm. Nobody thought she was missing. She just disappeared, and life at the shop went on. But investigators did find something. Someone mentioned that one of the shop's regulars was especially close to her. Close enough that they'll meet in private. And just a few days before she vanished, Kim told someone she was planning to pose as a nude model for him. He told her he could help her break into the scene of nude modeling, make connections, get established. His name was Lee Dong-shik, a 42-year-old plumber from Songpa district. Technically, his job was maintaining boilers in apartment buildings, but outside of work, he had a completely different identity. Lee was a serious amateur photographer. In fact, he wasn't just dabbling. He was an award-winning photographer. Critics called his work fresh, bold, shocking. And looking back, shocking might have been an understatement of the decade. A photographer, a planned photo shoot, and a body found in what looked like a staged clearing on Mount Hoam-san. This wasn't a coincidence. When police visited Lee's apartment at Garakdon, he did not deny knowing Kim. Did not deny visiting the shop either. Did not even deny that they had planned to take photos. But what he did deny was any involvement in her death. And when officers asked to see the photos from that supposed photo shoot, Lee danced around the questions, dodged them, did not produce a single image. So, Detective Saul, the head of investigations, pressed Lee to show at least some of his work, and Lee did, proudly, over 100 photos. But these were not normal portraits. They weren't even typical nude art. They were disturbing. The models in the photos, despite their heavy makeup and beauty, posed eerily reminiscent of corpses. There were photos of women lying face down on a white-draped coffin, injuries suggesting violence, pale faces, tongues protruding. The themes were consistent: death, decay, suffering. And Lee insisted, over and over again, that everything was staged. As detectives were still flipping through the photographs, investigators noticed Lee trying to slip one photo into a narrow space between a desk and the wall. And that alone tells you he knew exactly what he was doing. Detective Saul grabbed the photo and showed a woman wearing brown boots and a gray skirt lying on a bed of, guess what? Golden fallen leaves. Her fingernails were painted red. Her face was covered with a white cloth. When Saul confronted him, Lee scrambled for excuses. He claimed it was a staged photo, said he hired a model, said there were more photos, but he threw them away because he did not like how they turned out. Right. Investigators were not buying it. So they searched his home thoroughly and found more than 21 photographs of the young woman, the same one. In some, she was wearing a black tank top with striped blouse, gray skirt, and brown boots. In all of them, she was lying on a bed of dry, golden brown leaves. The location was very similar to where Kim was found. In the photos, the woman was clutching her body and chest. She looks like she's in pain. If you line up the photos, you can make out that she was gasping for air, twisting and turning. There are also photos of her with her hands tied and her clothes off. The position of the woman's body and the leaves in the photos were an exact match with the crime scene that Kim was found. No one was sure the photos were capturing an actual death. Investigators even discussed sending them to Japan for expert analysis, but their gut feeling told them these photos were real, not staged. The police immediately arrested Lee Dong-shik. He flatly denied hurting anyone. He insisted the woman in the photos wasn't Kim Kyung-hee at all. just another model he had hired. To confirm the woman in the photos was Kim, the police contacted her live-in boyfriend, and he immediately recognized her from the clothes and the brown boots in the photos. With that, the investigators pushed Lee for answers, and his story suddenly changed. He admitted they had met to take photos, but claimed she must have taken her own life afterwards. Then his story changed again. This time, he claimed he accidentally choked her to death, and then apparently they were fighting. He claimed they were lovers and that she tried to blackmail him. But around the same time, the autopsy results came back. Kim Kyung-hee had died from cyanide poisoning, so likely Lee Dong-shik had poisoned Kim Kyung-hee and photographed her final moments as she died. But here's the problem. Even with cyanide in her system, even with the photos, even with witnesses placing her with Lee, how do you prove he actually killed her? How do you prove he murdered her? How do you prove the photos were not staged? So the investigators sought help from a specialist. Through Professor Hong, they learned that the photos could be examined under a microscope to reveal details that the naked eye would not be able to see. Tiny clues, such as the way fine body hair stands up in cold conditions and gradually flattens after death, helped establish a timeline. By enlarging the images and arranging them in chronological order, the professor tracked subtle physical changes. His analysis showed a clear progression. The early photos, around 16 of them, captured Kim while she was still alive, and the later images documented her transition to death. When investigators presented this to Lee Dong-shik and walked him through all the photographs, it pressured him to finally confess what really happened. It was November 27, 1982, when Lee Dong-shik met Kim at the barbershop where she worked. Kim had already heard the talks among the other people that Lee was an award-winning photographer. In the early 80s, a quality camera was a serious professional object, not something you'd see every day, and Lee carried a high-end Japanese model everywhere. At a time when a skilled plumber might earn a few 100,000 won a month, and a standard camera alone costs around 270,000 won. That's roughly a full semester's tuition at a national university. The statement Lee's camera made was not lost on Kim. She noticed it all. During one of their conversations, Lee told her he had photographed many people, but that her figure was especially suited for nude photography. He assured her that if she was willing, she could become a successful model and earn a significant amount of money. For Kim, given her past, this attention felt like being seen for the first time. And by a recognized artist, no less. She was completely taken in by his flattery. The day before the murder, on December 13th, Lee and Kim made plans to travel to the mountains the following day for a nude photo shoot. At 9 a.m., she waited for him in front of the barbershop, dreaming of becoming a model and finally achieving financial stability. Kim had no reason to suspect anything. Meanwhile, Lee was finalizing the details of what he called his masterpiece. He had previously hired models to stage death scenes, but they were artificial. They're not real. Lee was obsessed with capturing authenticity, and in Kim Kyung-hee, he saw the perfect subject. A lonely woman with no close friends or family, someone society had already overlooked. That morning, he had already laced cold medicine with cyanide. And around 11 a.m., he met Kim, led her to a secluded spot on Mount Hoam-san, and convinced her to take the poisoned medicine, claiming it would prevent a cold during their shoot. The poison started to work. Kim clutched her chest and slowly died, while Lee did nothing. This was the moment he had long anticipated. He lifted his camera and began snapping photos of her final moments. How evil was that? When she stopped breathing, he did not stop. He bound her hands, removed her clothes, and photographed each step as if arranging a mannequin. Then he covered her with leaves and discarded the clothes and shoes 40 meters away. He took immense pride in every detail. The meticulous planning, the perfectly staged death photos, but his prized high-definition camera, which captured pores and body hair with unnerving clarity, would be what ultimately exposed him. He showed no guilt or remorse. He even defended his actions as art, claiming the moment of death was the most sublime moment of a person's life, and photographing it was art within art. So was this really his first time? Or do you think he's a serial killer in the making? Police continued searching Lee Dong-shik's office and home and found industrial-grade potassium cyanide. But not only that. Behind a wall, they found film negatives and Lee's notebook. Inside, with indecipherable poems and names, all written in codes. And, according to the lead investigator, there were the names of over 20 women, and one of them was Kim Kyung-hee. Lee Dong-shik displayed classical signs of psychopathy. He was manipulative, remorseless, versatile in his crimes, and sadistic, all while blending seamlessly into society. Some accounts describe him as a necrophile, driven by his lust and ego. But to understand how he got here, you have to look at where he came from. Lee Dong-shik was born in Daegu, but his childhood was anything but ordinary. Orphaned at the age of 6, he was sent to live with his uncle. He finished elementary school, and by 14, he had moved to Seoul, where he would spend the next 15 years working as a scavenger, collecting scrap paper and metals to make ends meet. By the age of 23, Lee had his first run-in with the law, a conviction for theft. By the time police finally caught up to him decades later, he already had 3 prior convictions. The investigators also found that he had lured a woman under false pretense and essayed her. And like many young men of his generation, he served his country in the Vietnam War during the 1970s. Lee carried with him a keychain containing an object roughly the size of a finger joint. Some said it was a human ear. Others claimed it was a camel's eye. He told authorities it had even kept him alive during the war. In his mid-30s, Lee found a new obsession: photography. His career began with a bizarre but attention-grabbing image, a photograph of a dying chicken, which won him a contest and opened the doors to further opportunities. He went on to win multiple awards, held a solo exhibition, and by 1982, he was admitted to the prestigious Photo Artists Society of Korea, which makes him not an amateur anymore. He was a pro. But his interests were darkening. He wanted to explore more provocative concepts in his photography. Lee became fixated on images that combined sex and death. Animal abuse, once enough to satisfy his needs, his artistic urges, no longer held the same allure. In his mind, to truly reach the pinnacle of art, he would need to record the ultimate subject: human death. Lee Dong-shik was married twice. He shared a child with his first wife. His first wife, according to the court records, vanished without a trace just a few years into their marriage. And Lee remarried and had 2 children with his second wife. Yet she, too, would mysteriously disappear. In 1974, his second wife's brother reported her missing after a long period of no contact, and Lee Dong-shik told authorities they were simply incompatible, claiming she had secretly traveled to Japan to earn money. But the truth, as it would later emerge, was probably far darker. At the time of Kim's murder, the case was still officially listed as a missing persons case. Yet, when Lee Dong-shik's name became public, the family of his wife came forward. According to the testimony, Lee's wife had confided in her sister-in-law about disturbing behavior. Apparently, Lee would tie her up with ropes and take sexually explicit photos of her. And this was not a sudden escalation. It had been happening for a long time. When questioned about his missing wife, Lee, as cold as ever, denied having anything to do with it. When Lee Dong-shik's murder case broke, it shocked not just South Korea, but the world outside. Japanese media highlighted his collection of nude magazines, keeping the story in international headlines for days. The case happened during the peak of Cold War, and South Korea was under military rule. With the 1986 Seoul.AG Games and the 1988 Olympic Games coming, The Chongdu-Huan administration did not want a bad image for the country. The government pressured police to close the case as quickly as possible and not dig into other possible crimes. No additional remains were ever found, and the full scope of his crimes remains a mystery. In the trial, Lee Dong-shik was charged with murder and abandonment of a corpse, and he was sentenced to death. And he appealed. During the second trial, the death sentence was upheld. Lee Dong-shik again appealed to the Supreme Court. The verdict remained. On May 27, 1986, Lee Dong-shik was executed by hanging. While imprisoned, Lee converted to Catholicism and was baptized with the name Paul. Unfortunately, we will never know what happened to Lee's ex-wives and the other names found in his notebook. And I do wonder how many of the photos in Lee's collections are real and how many are staged. It is said that his final 21 photos were sold to Japanese and French magazines for high prices immediately following his execution, though this has never really been confirmed. I mean, what is art? Please remember to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching.